The blue crystal towers of Kepler 442b gleamed softly in the light of their twin suns. Commander Veltar moved through the communication center with growing fear in his crystalline heart. His people had lived in peace for over 3,000 years, building their cities of living stone and sharing thoughts through harmonic frequencies that rang like music across their world. Now everything was about to end. The reports kept coming, in from their outer colonies, each one worse than the last. The Korthak had broken through the defense grid at Zeta Station. Colony 7 had gone silent 12 hours ago. The mining platforms around the gas giant were sending automated distress signals before cutting off one by one. Navigator Zixla approached him with the latest tactical update. Her normally bright blue glow had dimmed to a worried purple. "Commander, our defense fleet is down to 43 ships. The Korthak vessels are reproducing faster than we can destroy them." Veltar looked at the main display screen showing their star system. Red dots marked enemy positions, spreading like an infection through space. Each dot represented a bioship the size of a small city, filled with creatures that existed only to consume and grow. The Korthak were not just invaders. They were a plague that turned everything they touched into more of themselves. "How long until they reach the homeworld?" Veltar asked, though he dreaded the answer. 6 days at their current rate of advance, Zixla replied. "Maybe 5 if they continue to accelerate." Veltar felt his internal light fade almost to darkness. His species had tried everything. They offered the Korthak empty worlds to colonize. They attempted to communicate through mathematical sequences and musical harmonies. They even tried to surrender, hoping to preserve at least some of their people. Nothing worked. The Korthak had no interest in negotiation or coexistence. They simply consumed everything organic they encountered and converted it into biomass for more ships and warriors. Entire star systems had fallen to them in the past century, leaving behind nothing but sterile rocks floating in space. "Open the emergency galactic frequency," Veltar commanded. "All civilizations, all known species, broadcast on every channel." The communication array powered up with a deep harmonic hum. Soon their distress signal would reach across hundreds of light years to every major civilization in known space. The Altarians with their merchant fleets, the Vegans with their vast libraries of knowledge, the Centauri Republic with their diplomatic corps. Surely someone would help. The first responses came within hours. The Altarian Trade Council expressed deep sympathy for their situation and offered to provide refugee transport for non-combatants. The Vegan Collective promised to preserve Zephyrian cultural archives in their great libraries. The Centauri diplomats suggested forming a committee to study the Korthak threat. No one offered military assistance. Veltar understood their reluctance. Most galactic civilizations had evolved past the need for large military forces. Wars were rare, usually resolved through economic pressure or diplomatic negotiation. The idea of total warfare, of complete extinction of an enemy species, was foreign to most thinking beings in the galaxy. But the Korthak were not most thinking beings. They were a force of nature, like a cosmic storm or stellar collapse. They could not be reasoned with because they had no individual consciousness to reason with. The hive mind that controlled them had only one goal: grow, consume, spread. As the hours passed and more responses came in, Veltar began to lose hope. Offers of sympathy, promises to remember their civilization, suggestions for peaceful solutions that had already been tried and failed. The galaxy was full of species that had forgotten how to fight because they had never needed to learn. Then a new signal arrived from the frontier sectors, from a region most civilized species considered barely explored. The transmission was rough and filled with static as if sent by primitive equipment. The universal translator struggled with the harsh sounds before finally producing readable text. "This is Admiral Jack Morrison of the Terran Defense Fleet. We received your distress call. We are preparing a response force. Estimated time of arrival is 72 hours. Hold your positions and maintain defensive operations until we arrive. Veltar stared at the message for a long moment. Terrans. Humans. He had heard whispers about them in diplomatic circles, but little concrete information. They were a recently discovered species from a world designated as Class 12 on the habitability scale. Most life-bearing worlds rated Class 1 or Class 2. A Class 12 designation meant the planet was barely habitable even for its native species. Commander, Zixla said quietly, the preliminary reports about the human homeworld are disturbing. Constant seismic activity, violent weather patterns, temperature extremes, and predatory life forms that hunt in organized groups. Their planet appears to be actively hostile to life. Veltar pulled up what little data they had on humanity. The reports painted a picture of a species that had somehow survived on a world that should have killed them millions of years ago. Massive storms that could level cities, earthquakes that split continents, ice ages that lasted thousands of years. And somehow, not only had humans survived, they had thrived. More concerning were the scattered reports from traders who had encountered human vessels. They described ships built like fortresses, bristling with weapons that seemed designed for one purpose, destroying other ships as efficiently as possible. Human crews were described as polite but intense, quick to take offense, and quicker to respond with force. Should we accept their offer? Zixla asked. The cultural analysis suggests they may be more dangerous than helpful. Their society appears to be built around concepts of territorial defense and resource competition. Veltar looked again at the tactical display. The Korthak advance continued unabated. His own fleet was down to fewer than 40 ships. The enemy, numbered in the thousands and grew stronger every hour. Soon they would begin the final assault on his homeworld, and 4 billion Zephyrians would be converted into biomass for the hive. Send a response, he decided. Confirm that we accept their assistance. Include our tactical situation and enemy analysis. If they are truly willing to help, they should know what they are facing. The reply came back almost immediately. Understood. We are en route with sufficient force to handle the situation. Prepare your people for intensive combat operations. We will eliminate the threat. The confidence in that message was both reassuring and terrifying. The humans spoke of eliminating the Korthak threat as if it were a simple matter of logistics rather than a desperate battle for survival. Either they were ignorantly overconfident, or they possessed capabilities that no other galactic civilization could imagine. As Veltar watched the tactical display update with new Korthak movements, he wondered what kind of help he had just invited into his peaceful corner of space. The Korthak were a nightmare that consumed worlds, but the humans came from a world that had spent millions of years trying to kill them, and they had not just survived but conquered it. Perhaps, he thought with growing unease, he had just replaced one monster with another. But at least this monster claimed to be on their side. He could only hope that when the battle was over, they would still be glad they had asked for help from the beings who called themselves humanity. The emergency meeting took place in the war room deep beneath Terra Station, humanity's primary military command center. Admiral Jack Morrison stood before a massive holographic display showing the Zephyrian star system, his weathered face reflecting decades of combat experience. Around the curved table sat the commanders of Earth's most powerful fleets, men and women who had earned their positions through blood and fire. The distress signal from the crystal beings had reached Earth just 6 hours ago, but already the military machine was moving with practiced efficiency. Morrison had seen this type of threat before, during the early colonial wars when humanity first ventured beyond their home system. Swarm species that reproduced faster than conventional weapons could destroy them. The solution was never subtle. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a classic biological infestation scenario, Morrison announced, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had faced impossible odds and survived. The Korthak operate on the same principles we observed during the Titan incident 5 years ago. They overwhelm through numbers and convert all organic matter into additional units. Captain Lisa Park of the UHS Constitution raised her hand. Her ship was one of the newer dreadnoughts, built specifically for dealing with large-scale threats. Sir, intelligence reports suggest the Zephyrians are a pacifist civilization. They may not be prepared for the type of warfare we will need to employ to eliminate this threat. Morrison nodded grimly. The galaxy was full of species that had forgotten how to fight, if they had ever learned at all. They lived in a bubble of peace, maintained by the assumption that all conflicts could be resolved through discussion and compromise. It was a beautiful ideal that worked right up until something like the Korthak appeared. That is exactly why. They need our help, Morrison replied. Most galactic civilizations have enjoyed peace for so long that they have lost the ability to recognize and respond to existential threats. They see the Korthak as a diplomatic problem when it is actually an extermination event. Commander Kyle Stevens pulled up the tactical assessment on his datapad. As Morrison's strategic planning officer, he had spent the last few hours calculating exactly what would be needed to handle the situation. We have confirmed reports of Korthak bioships, numbering in the thousands. They have already consumed at least 3 Zephyrian colonies and are advancing on the homeworld. Standard projections suggest they will achieve critical mass within days. Recommendations? Morrison asked, though he already knew what the answer would be. Full deployment, Stevens replied without hesitation. We mobilize everything we have available. Capital ships, destroyer squadrons, fighter wings, and ground assault forces. We also recommend bringing the experimental weapons platforms for field testing. Captain Park frowned at her own tactical display. Kyle, are you sure we need that? Level of force? The Zephyrians are asking for assistance, not total warfare. Stevens looked up from his calculations with the patient expression of someone explaining basic mathematics. Lisa, the Korthak reproduction rate means that every hour we delay gives them time to convert more biomass into additional ships. By the time we arrive, they could have doubled their numbers. The only effective response is overwhelming force applied immediately. Morrison studied the fleet roster appearing on the main screen. 47 capital ships including the flagship, UHS Defiance. 150 destroyers of various classes. 300 fighter squadrons with full support crews. The 2nd Marine Battalion under Colonel Emma Rodriguez, equipped with the latest power armor and kinetic acceleration weapons. It was an impressive force by human standards, but Morrison knew it represented only a fraction of Earth's total military capacity. The rest of the fleet was spread across dozens of systems, protecting human colonies and trade routes from the various threats that seemed to emerge with disturbing regularity in their corner of space. What about ground operations? Asked Colonel Rodriguez, joining the meeting via secure transmission from the Marine staging area. Her face appeared on a side screen, showing the controlled intensity that had made her legendary among the assault forces. Full deployment, Morrison confirmed. If this goes to planetary assault, we need to be ready for bioform contamination protocols. Bring everything rated for hostile environment operations. As the human fleet prepared for departure, news of their response began spreading through the galactic communication networks. Most species monitored the emergency frequencies, and humanity's military response was unlike anything they had seen before. The sheer scale of ships being deployed was staggering by galactic standards. The Altarian Trade Council issued a formal statement expressing concern about the militaristic nature of the human response. Their diplomatic corps suggested that such overwhelming force might cause more problems than it solved. The Vegan Collective published research papers about the psychological trauma that extended warfare could cause to all involved species. Several minor civilizations quietly began moving their own fleets to defensive positions, not because they feared the Korthak, but because they were becoming nervous about humanity's military capabilities. The humans had been relatively quiet since joining galactic society, engaging primarily in trade and scientific exchange. This was the first time anyone had seen them mobilize for war. Admiral Morrison reviewed the intelligence reports one final time before departure. The Korthak hive was indeed massive, possibly representing the largest biological threat humanity had encountered since the early colonial period. By galactic standards, it was considered an unstoppable force that would consume everything in its path. By human standards, it was Tuesday. "All ships report ready for departure," Stevens announced from the command center. "Fleet coordination protocols are active. Logistics trains are prepared for extended operations." Morrison looked around the war room at his officers. These were people who had been shaped by humanity's violent history, trained to respond to threats with calculated aggression. They understood that sometimes peace could only be maintained through the application of superior firepower. "Signal the fleet," Morrison commanded. "Set course for the Zephyrian system, maximum sustainable speed. We have civilians to protect and an infestation to eliminate." The human fleet departed Earth space with the efficiency of a military machine that had been tested in countless conflicts. Behind them, the industrial shipyards immediately began producing replacement vessels and ammunition. Human strategic doctrine emphasized one simple principle: always have more resources than you think you will need. As the ships accelerated toward their destination, Admiral Morrison stood on the bridge of the UHS Defiance and considered what they would find when they arrived. The Zephyrians were expecting help, but they had no idea what kind of help they had requested. They had called upon a species that viewed violence as a necessary tool for survival, beings who had learned to fight by facing extinction every day for millions of years. The galaxy was about to discover what happened when you asked Deathworlders for assistance. The human fleet arrived in the Zephyrian system like a storm of metal and fire. Commander Veltar watched from his command center as hundreds of ships dropped out of hyperspace in perfect formation, their weapons already powered and targeting, systems scanning for threats. The Zephyrians had never seen anything like it. Their own vessels moved with graceful curves and flowing lines, designed for beauty as much as function. The human ships looked like they had been built for one purpose only: destroying other ships. The lead vessel was massive, easily 3 times the size of the largest Zephyrian cruiser. Dark gray armor plating covered its hull, broken only by the glowing ports of what appeared to be weapon systems. As Veltar watched, smaller ships began launching from its bays, each one moving with predatory speed toward the outer system where Korthak scouts had been detected. Before Veltar could even send a proper greeting, Admiral Morrison's face appeared on the main communication screen. The human looked exactly like the reports had suggested: scarred, weathered, with eyes that seemed to see everything as a potential threat. Behind him, the bridge of his ship buzzed with activity as officers moved with military precision. "Admiral Morrison, reporting for duty," the human said without preamble. "We have analyzed your tactical situation and identified the optimal solution. Stand by for immediate deployment of combat assets." Veltar tried to follow standard diplomatic protocols. "Admiral Morrison, we are grateful for your response to our distress call. Perhaps we should begin with a formal briefing on the current situation and discuss possible approaches to resolving this conflict." But the humans were already moving. Fighter squadrons streaked toward the edge of the system where Korthak bioships lurked. Veltar expected to see some attempt at communication or warning, as was standard in galactic warfare. Instead, the human fighters opened fire immediately with weapons that turned the organic vessels into expanding clouds of superheated gas. "Admiral," Veltar said urgently, his crystalline form flickering with distress, "perhaps we should attempt diplomatic contact with the Korthak forces first. Our philosophers believe that all intelligent beings can reach understanding through proper communication." Several human officers on the bridge turned to look at their admiral, with expressions that Veltar found difficult to interpret. "Captain," Rodriguez, a stern-faced woman with the bearing of a career soldier, answered before Morrison could speak. "Commander Veltar, with respect, we have encountered this type of enemy before. The Korthak are not here to negotiate or establish peaceful Coexistence. They are here to consume your entire species and convert your biological matter into more of themselves. Diplomatic solutions do not work on hive minds focused on expansion through consumption. As if responding to her words, the Korthak reaction to the destroyed scouts was immediate and overwhelming. Hundreds of bioships began pouring into the system from the outer dark, their organic hulls pulsing with aggressive bioluminescence. The sight should have terrified any rational being. The sheer number of enemy vessels was staggering. The humans seemed pleased by this development. "Contact confirmed," reported Commander Stevens from his position at the tactical station. "Multiple hostile contacts entering the system. Korthak biosignatures detected. Current count is 400 and rising rapidly." "Excellent," Admiral Morrison replied with a satisfaction that horrified the listening Zephyrians. "All ships deploy in hunter-killer formation. Remember, these are biological vessels with distributed nervous systems. Target their neural clusters and reproduction nodes. Our objective is complete sterilization of the infestation." What followed was unlike anything in recorded galactic military history. The human ships moved through space like apex predators, their weapon systems designed specifically to cause maximum damage to organic targets. Plasma torpedoes burned through bioarmor. Kinetic accelerators punched holes through living hulls, and specialized chemical weapons disrupted the neural connections that linked individual ships to the hive mind. The Zephyrians watched in growing horror as the humans systematically dismantled the Korthak force. There was no hesitation, no mercy, no attempt to preserve enemy life for study or negotiation. The humans fought with the calculated efficiency of exterminators dealing with vermin, treating the destruction of sentient beings as a simple matter of pest control. "Admiral Morrison," Veltar transmitted with increasing urgency, "your tactical approach is extremely violent. Perhaps we could capture some of the Korthak vessels intact for scientific study. Understanding their biology might help us find non-violent solutions to future encounters." Morrison's response was immediate and final. "Commander, I appreciate your concern for preserving life. That instinct has allowed your species to build a peaceful and prosperous civilization. However, the Korthak cannot be reasoned with, studied, safely, or reformed through any known means. They represent an extinction-level threat that requires complete elimination. Any other response is simply delayed suicide." As the battle continued, more human ships kept arriving from deep space. Support vessels, medical frigates, supply convoys, and massive dreadnoughts that made the earlier arrivals look small by comparison. It became clear that humanity had committed not just a fleet, but their entire available military capacity to this single engagement. The efficiency of the human response was terrifying. Within hours, they had established complete space superiority. Their fighters patrolled the system in tight formations, hunting down any remaining Korthak scouts. Their capital ships took positions that provided overlapping fields of fire, creating kill zones that nothing could survive. Their support vessels began setting up what they called forward operating bases on asteroids and moons. "Admiral," Veltar asked nervously, "how many ships are you planning to deploy for this operation?" Morrison consulted his tactical display with the casual attention of someone reviewing a shopping list. "Current operational parameters call for 800 combat vessels plus full logistical support. We are also bringing terraforming equipment, in case biological contamination requires planetary sterilization and reconstruction." The number stunned Veltar into silence. The entire Zephyrian defense force had numbered fewer than 200 ships at full strength. Most galactic civilizations considered a fleet of 50 vessels to be a major military deployment. The humans were bringing 16 times that number to deal with what they apparently viewed as a routine threat. But what truly terrified the Zephyrian commander was the growing realization that this massive deployment represented only a fraction of human military capability. Communications intercepts suggested that Earth maintained thousands of warships, with industrial capacity to replace losses faster than most species could build their entire fleets. when human advance scouts made contact with the main Korthak. Force gathering in the outer system, the engagement lasted less than 10 minutes. The scouts reported their findings with the professional detachment of people conducting a routine survey mission. Admiral, we have positive identification of the primary hive cluster, the lead scout reported. Recommend immediate deployment of scorched earth protocols. Complete biological sterilization appears to be the optimal solution. Veltar's crystalline form went completely transparent with shock. Scorched earth protocols? Admiral Morrison's expression remained neutral as he explained. Complete elimination of all biological matter in the target zone, Commander. We superheat the affected systems to temperatures that break down organic compounds at the molecular level. It is the only method that ensures 100% removal of hive contamination without risk of resurgence. For the first time since sending their desperate plea for help, Commander Veltar began to wonder if the Zephyrians had made a terrible mistake. They had called for salvation from monsters, and salvation had indeed arrived. But their saviors might be far more dangerous than anything they had originally faced. By the end of the second day, the Korthak advance force had been completely destroyed. The speed and efficiency of the human response stunned not only the Zephyrians, but also the dozens of galactic observers who had been monitoring the situation from safe distances. What should have been a desperate siege lasting weeks had become a systematic extermination campaign completed in less than 48 hours. Admiral Morrison established his primary command post aboard the UHS Defiance, the massive dreadnought that served as the flagship for the human fleet. Commander Veltar had been invited to observe human military operations firsthand, an experience that left him more disturbed with each passing hour. The ship's bridge operated like a precise machine, with officers reporting casualty counts, ammunition expenditure, and tactical assessments in flat professional voices that treated the destruction of thousands of living beings as routine paperwork. The humans moved through their duties with mechanical precision that frightened Veltar more than their weapons. When Captain Rodriguez announced that long-range sensors had detected the main Korthak hive cluster 3 systems away, the response was immediate mobilization for another offensive operation rather than defensive preparation to protect the Zephyrian homeworld. Sir, deep scan analysis confirms a Class Alpha hive infestation, reported Commander Stevens from his position at the tactical station. Estimated biomass readings suggest they have consumed at least 6 inhabited worlds in the target systems. Core hive ships number in the thousands, possibly tens of thousands. Morrison studied the tactical display with the focused attention of a predator analyzing its prey. The holographic representation showed a massive cluster of biological ships, arranged in complex patterns around 3 star systems. Most galactic military commanders would have seen an impossible challenge. Morrison saw a target list. Tactical recommendations? He asked his staff. Standard sterilization protocol, Captain, Park replied from her ship's connection. We deploy heavy bombardment platforms in a containment formation, establish a perimeter to prevent any escape attempts, and proceed with systematic elimination of all hive nodes and support structures. Veltar's crystalline form flickered with distress patterns that his species used to express extreme anxiety. Admiral Morrison, surely such aggressive action is not necessary. Perhaps we could attempt to contain the Korthak, force them to retreat to uninhabited systems where they would pose no threat to populated worlds. The human officers turned to look at the Zephyrian commander with expressions that ranged from confusion to something that might have been pity. Colonel Rodriguez, who had joined the meeting via holographic projection from her command ship, spoke with the weary patience of someone explaining basic facts to a child. Commander Veltar, I understand that your species values the preservation of life and seeks peaceful solutions to conflicts. Those are admirable qualities that have allowed you to build a beautiful and prosperous civilization. But the Korthak represent an existential threat to all biological life in this galactic region. They do not retreat, they do not negotiate, and they do not coexist with other species. Every hour we delay taking action, added Admiral Morrison, they convert more biomass into additional ships and warriors. Every moment of hesitation means more inhabited worlds consumed and more innocent beings converted into hive material. From a strategic standpoint, the only rational response is immediate application of overwhelming force. The human fleet began, moving toward the Korthak home cluster, but their approach differed dramatically from anything in standard galactic military doctrine. Instead of cautious advance with prepared defensive positions and multiple fallback plans, they moved in aggressive attack formations designed for maximum offensive capability. Scout ships ranged far ahead, seeking optimal attack vectors and identifying priority targets. Support vessels began manufacturing specialized ammunition designed specifically for biological targets. As they traveled through hyperspace, more human ships continued arriving from Earth and the outer colonies. Veltar realized with growing alarm that humanity was treating this engagement as a full-scale military mobilization. Resource extraction ships, mobile factories, medical platforms, and what appeared to be civilian evacuation transports filled the staging areas. "Admiral Morrison," Veltar inquired with barely controlled nervousness, "exactly how many ships are you planning to deploy for this operation?" Morrison consulted his strategic display with the casual attention of someone checking the weather. Forecast. Current force projection analysis calls for 800 combat vessels plus complete logistical support infrastructure. We are also bringing terraforming equipment and planetary reconstruction assets in case we need to rehabilitate worlds suffering from extensive biological contamination. The numbers left Veltar speechless with shock. Most galactic civilizations considered a fleet of 50 ships to be a massive military deployment that required months of planning and resource allocation. The humans were casually deploying 16 times that number to address what they viewed as a single localized threat. But what truly horrified the Zephyrian commander was the growing realization that this enormous fleet represented only a small fraction of human military capability. Communications intercepts and casual conversations suggested that Earth's total defense force numbered in the tens of thousands of ships, with industrial capacity sufficient to replace combat losses faster than most species could construct their entire military forces. When human advance scouts made contact with Korthak outer patrols near the Hive cluster, the engagements were over within minutes. Human weapons seemed specifically designed to counter biological ships, suggesting extensive prior experience fighting similar enemies. The scouts reported their findings with casual professionalism that suggested this type of mission was routine work rather than a desperate battle for survival. "Admiral, we have complete tactical analysis of the hive structure," reported the lead reconnaissance team. "Biological density readings confirm massive infestation across all 3 target systems. Recommend immediate deployment of the Scorched Earth Protocol for complete sterilization of infected zones." Veltar's form went completely transparent with shock and horror. "Scorched Earth Protocol?" Admiral Morrison's expression remained completely neutral as he provided the explanation that would haunt Veltar's dreams for years to come. "Complete elimination of all biological matter in the target zones, Commander. We use focused energy beams to heat the affected systems to temperatures that break down organic compounds at the molecular level. It is the only method that guarantees complete removal of hive contamination with zero possibility of resurgence or reinfection." The casual way Morrison discussed the sterilization of entire star systems, the complete destruction of worlds that had once supported billions of living beings, struck Veltar like a physical blow. These humans spoke of reshaping solar systems the way his people discussed rearranging furniture in their crystal homes. The process typically takes 72 to 96 hours for complete sterilization, continued Commander Stevens helpfully. After that, we can begin atmospheric reconstruction and biological rehabilitation. Most worlds can be returned to habitable status within 5 to 10 standard years. For the first time since sending their desperate distress signal, Commander Veltar began to understand the full scope of what they had unleashed. The Zephyrians had called for help from beings who viewed the complete destruction and reconstruction of solar systems as standard operating procedure. They had invited monsters to fight monsters, and now they would have to live with whichever monster won. The final battle against the Korthak Hive cluster lasted exactly 18 hours and 37 minutes. Commander Veltar watched from the bridge of the UHS Defiance as the humans approached the engagement with the methodical efficiency of exterminators dealing with a particularly stubborn infestation. They surrounded the 3 infected star systems with overwhelming firepower, systematically destroyed every bioship that attempted to escape, and then proceeded to sterilize entire worlds with weapons that turned populated planets into balls of molten rock. The thoroughness of the human response exceeded anything Veltar could have imagined. They did not simply defeat the Korthak. They erased every trace of their existence from 3 solar systems, burning away not just the hive ships but every spore, every organic molecule, every possibility that the infestation could ever return. When they were finished, the star systems looked exactly as they had millions of years ago, before any life had ever evolved on those worlds. Biological contamination successfully eliminated, reported Captain Park as her battle group finished the final bombardment sequence. All organic, matter neutralized to molecular level, systems cleared for eventual recolonization and terraforming operations. Admiral Morrison nodded with the satisfaction of someone completing a routine task. Outstanding work. Deploy cleanup crews and begin preliminary terraforming surveys. I want these systems restored to habitable status within the standard time frame. The casual manner in which the humans discussed reshaping entire star systems disturbed Veltar almost as much as their military capabilities. These beings did not just fight wars. They remade reality to match their strategic requirements, treating the reconstruction of solar systems as a simple engineering problem. As the human fleet began establishing what they called permanent security installations throughout the sector, delegations from various galactic civilizations began arriving to assess the new situation. The Altarian Trade Council, the Vegan Collective, and representatives from dozens of minor species came to understand what had happened and what it meant for the future of their region of space. The humans received these delegations with polite professionalism, but they made it clear that they now considered this entire sector to be under Terran protection. Admiral Morrison explained their position during a multi-species conference held aboard the Zephyrian Command Station, his words carrying the weight of absolute authority. The Korthak represented a Class Alpha extinction threat to all biological life in this galactic region, Morrison stated with the calm certainty of someone presenting scientific facts. Our analysis indicates they would have consumed most life-bearing worlds in this galactic arm within 50 standard years. The elimination of that threat necessarily creates a security vacuum that requires appropriate management. Ambassador T. Len of the Altarian Trade Council expressed the concern that many species were feeling. His normally confident demeanor showed signs of stress as he addressed the human admiral. Admiral Morrison, while we deeply appreciate your assistance in eliminating the Korthak threat, the establishment of a permanent human military presence raises serious questions about galactic sovereignty and the independence of established civilizations. Morrison's response was delivered with the same calm professionalism that had characterized all human communications. But underneath the polite words lay an unmistakable foundation of absolute power. Ambassador Tilen, humanity has no interest in governing other species or claiming territory that belongs to established civilizations. However, we do have a clear responsibility to ensure that similar threats do not emerge in the future. Our security presence will focus on threat detection and rapid response capabilities. What the humans did not explain, but what became clear through observation, was that their definition of potential threats was considerably broader than most galactic species realized. Human scout ships began patrolling trade routes that had Never seen military vessels. Investigation teams started monitoring unusual biological activity in previously ignored systems. Monitoring stations appeared on asteroids and uninhabited moons throughout the sector. Commander Veltar found himself serving as the primary liaison between the human forces and the various galactic civilizations. It was a position that gave him unique insight into human thinking, and what he learned filled him with growing unease about the future of their region of space. During a private conversation with Colonel Rodriguez in her temporary office aboard the command station, he finally voiced the concerns that had been building in his mind for weeks. "Colonel, your species approaches conflict with an intensity that other civilizations find deeply disturbing. Do you never consider peaceful alternatives to violence?" Rodriguez considered the question seriously, her expression thoughtful as she looked out through the viewport at the human patrol ships moving through space. "Commander Veltar, humans spent hundreds of thousands of years fighting for survival on a world that was actively trying to kill us every single day. We faced ice ages that lasted millennia, volcanic eruptions that blocked out the sun, massive earthquakes that split continents, and predators that hunted us for food." She gestured toward the tactical displays showing human patrol routes throughout the sector. "Peace is a luxury that species earn through demonstrated strength and the willingness to use it when necessary. The Korthak represented exactly the type of existential threat that requires absolute response. Anything less is simply delayed extinction for everyone involved." Their conversation was interrupted by an emergency alert from the Human Deep Space Monitoring Network. Another biological anomaly had been detected in a distant system, possibly indicating the presence of another hive species or similar threat. The human response was immediate and overwhelming. 200 ships deployed within 6 hours, with authorization for complete system sterilization if the threat proved to be genuine. As Veltar watched the human fleet depart on what they called a routine threat assessment mission, he began to understand the full scope of what his distress signal had unleashed upon the galaxy. The Zephyrians had called for help from a species that viewed violence as the primary solution to complex problems. They had invited apex predators into a galaxy populated by creatures that had forgotten how to defend themselves. The humans would indeed protect galactic civilization from threats like the Korthak. They would patrol space lanes, investigate unusual phenomena, and respond to any sign of danger with overwhelming force. But in doing so, they had fundamentally altered the balance of power in known space. Every species now lived under the watchful protection of beings who could sterilize star systems without moral hesitation. The irony was not lost on Veltar as he composed his final report on the incident. They had sent out a desperate plea for salvation from monsters that wanted to consume their civilization. Salvation had indeed arrived in the form of different monsters who specialized in consuming other monsters. But these new monsters had decided to stay, to watch over the galaxy and protect it from future threats. Commander Veltar's final log entry captured the bitter reality of their situation. "We called for salvation from creatures that would destroy us, and salvation came, in the form of creatures that could destroy anything. We are safe now from the Korthak and anything like them, but we are safe only because we now live under the protection of beings who learned to survive by becoming more dangerous than anything that threatened them." The human fleet had solved the immediate problem of the Korthak infestation, but they had also established themselves as the dominant military power in the galaxy, guardians who watched everything and trusted nothing to chance. The age of peaceful coexistence was over, replaced by an era of security enforced by creatures from a death world who understood that sometimes the only way to preserve life was to be very good at ending it.